Hi everyone, I'm Drake, he, they, them, also known as the Lion Knight 42. Welcome to Roll for Perspective, a show where I sit down with content creators, DMs, artists, streamers, and more within the TTRPG space to discuss settings, systems, tips, and insights. For this episode, I'm sitting down with Marshall to discuss his upcoming TTRPG, Pokémon Tales, and the game creation process. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. Why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do in the space?
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Marshall, he, him. I go by Iron Echo Games on Twitter and on Itch. And mainly, I read a lot of games, design a few games, and run a fair share of games. So a little bit of a mix all over the place. I also stream with Live from the Apocalypse. We do charity streams. We do a weekly or bi-weekly one, Missing Numbers, which is also Pokemon themed, that we do every Tuesday. For It used to be for Surfrider Foundation, which is like ocean preservation, and currently we have pivoted to Planned Parenthood.
Nice. So I know we're here mostly to talk about Pokemon Tales today, right?
Absolutely.
So I know there's a number of other Pokemon TTRPGs that sort of exist out there. So what inspired you to make Pokemon Tales? And as I guess would be an obvious follow up, what sets Pokemon Tales apart from other Pokemon TTRPGs?
Yeah. So my journey with Pokemon TTRPGs really starts about 3 years ago. I had actually played one of the primary systems a couple years before a friend ran it, but other than that, hadn't really delved into it much. And right after my daughter was born, I was listening to a podcast called The Roaring Trainers, which is a Pokemon TTRPG podcast. It is a fantastic podcast. I highly recommend it to pretty much anyone. They've done two campaigns. The second one is a follow up to the first with a time skip. Um, but it hit what I've said for years Pokemon could be and never accomplishes in the games, in the movies, in the TV show. There is so much potential in that universe that like never really gets recognized. I think the closest personally is the manga, but like I think Pokemon always comes very short of its potential. It's a really cool setting and concept. And that podcast really hit it. And so I was like, oh, TTRPGs are how you do it. I want to do this. Like, this is how you realize Pokemon in the way I've always wanted. So I started looking into Pokemon TTRPGs, and I've read almost every one that's out and available. Um, and they all do interesting things very well. The most popular one's probably Pokemon Tabletop United, which is a brilliant piece of design. Like, I cannot say enough good things about the design of that game. It understands the games and it translates them to the TTRPG space in rules as almost as good as you possibly could. The problem with that, though, is that in the games, you have a computer doing all the math and all the complications and all of that for you. And in a TTRPG, you don't have that. So it grinds to a halt, or your GM does a massive amount of lift and prep work ahead of a session to try and make it not grind to a halt every session. And I'm sure there's some people out there who are better at running it than me, but I challenge anyone. I've never met a GM who's run it well who said they didn't do a ton of prep work to make that happen. And then that's not just to talk on that system. There's tons of others, and they vary in like complexity, but they're all crunchy because Pokemon's crunchy. The great mysticism of Pokemon is that it hides all the crunch behind the background, but there's a lot of crunch there. And so the closest is probably Pokemans, which is what we use for actually our stream. But even then, it didn't quite do quite the feeling I wanted. And so I had been reading these, trying to figure out what I was going to do. I built my own like setting, my own region, all this stuff. And then about a year ago, year and a half now, I read Bats, John Battle, who goes by Bats on Twitter, did Pokemon Dungeon Crawler, which was Pokemon OSR. It is literally a dungeon crawler, but you play as Pokemon. It's gritty, it's simple, it is just an OSR style dungeon crawler. And it flowed well and it checked a lot of the feeling boxes I want from Pokemon while throwing a lot of mechanics out the window. Like a evolution is done like Digivolution. Like it's not, it's a you get it and then you go back down. Like it's very, it doesn't care about being perfect. It cares about giving you the feeling that Pokemon gave you. And that like turned a light bulb on in my brain that I was like, oh, you can get that feeling without being a simulation or an emulation. You can just get the energy and the spirit of the series. And so I started off actually writing. I wrote expansion. It's still on my itch. It's like one of the first things I ever wrote. The formatting's awful, but I wrote an expansion to his game that added more of stuff I wanted, like a dungeon generator and stuff like that. And then from there, I just kept expanding and growing. And so the first version of Pokemon Tales really was more of like this weird OSR hybrid with like trainers. Um, and then about 5 months ago, I got the kind of inspiration for this iteration of it. And that since then it changed kind of radically. Because I almost finished or made pretty good progress into that OSR version, ran it, my players loved it. And I was like, this isn't what I wanted at all. Like, I'm glad y'all are having a great time, but this isn't it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had to like scrap the whole thing, keep what I learned from it, but almost build it from scratch with an entirely different style of system while still keeping some of that like feeling to it.
Yeah, that seems to be something I see a lot as people, design games and sit with them is whatever your first like finished product is, it's always missing something, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
always things that you have to be like, okay, and it can scale anywhere from like, okay, I need to rip out everything but this and just start over to, tweaks here and there. You brought up OSR a bunch, and I know we've talked a little bit about it previously, but what are some of your other key influences in designing the game, and what kind of role did they play in the pieces sort of coming together as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think of Pokemon Tales as a quadrant of four pieces, and like two of them are very obvious, and two are really kind of like under the hood stuff that people might not pick up at first. And so the obvious ones are obviously Pokemon as a entity, as a genre, the Pokemon manga, Pokemon Adventures, especially.
So good.
If Pokemon Tabletop Adventures hadn't claimed the Adventures number, this game would be Pokemon Adventures because I love that manga and the TV show. Um, and obviously, as I mentioned, Bat's Pokemon Dungeon Crawler, and also Wander Home. So belonging outside belonging games in general, because of their these like free form storytelling, like I really love that style of game. I love GMless. I hate prep, and frankly, I don't like running games as the full GM. I like leaning on my players to add to story and stuff like that. So that was a big influence. And that's where the system started from, actually. And I'll kind of probably circle back around to that. And then the other two were Ironsworn, the game system, and the OSR in general. So again, going back to probably the most obvious one, which is like the belonging outside belonging games or no dice, no masters, depending on your preference. They use both names. Those games use a token exchange mechanic, which Pokemon Tales uses as well. And they use playbooks where all of the players usually, they're often played GMless, and the players both control their character, but they also control setting elements. So you invoke those when you want to have the setting act. Like the setting is almost a character in a lot of ways, and so it acts in the game. And those games are incredibly fun. They're very flexible. They're great for like building a story together, and also I think for teaching people who haven't GM before how to exercise that kind of control and how to like experiment with it outside of like throwing it all on their plate and saying try GMing. Like it's a great way to bring people into GMing. Um, but anyone who's played those games, unless they're just like a rock star storyteller, can tell you that usually they hit these kind of like lulls where like you're all kind of stuck. You don't want to step on each other's toes. You're struggling for ideas. There's also a lot of like kind of bandwidth management of like you're looking at all these different playbooks trying to know what to pull. And they all use moves which can trigger at any moment. So you're kind of always having to be aware of all these moves and what might be the right thing to use at that time. And I found that even the best ones like uh can kind of get into this like sticking point where the story lulls and you don't know what to do. And my one of my favorites is Sleepaway, which is written by Jay Dragon, that has this fantastic option, which is your guardians of a summer camp, and there's supernatural threats approaching your campers, and the supernatural threats are represented by the Lindworm. And anytime anyone can invoke the Lindworm, and they flip a card, get a token, and then something bad happens. And what that does in a belonging outside belonging style game is it gives you a lever to pull whenever things are slowing down that immediately gives you what's next, what's happening, what's going. And I love that mechanic. And separately, also by Jay Dragon, I really love Wander Home. Wander Home was a key inspiration of this. It's completely peaceful. It's in a world without violence, but a post-war world. So there's still like kind of echoes of that trauma. And it's really about these characters who can't settle, traveling until they can together and like working through their kind of shared trauma, discovering these wonderful things. It's inspired by like Redwall. So it's both heartwarming, but also incredibly deep and at times very like depressing isn't the right word, but it gets you in the heart. Like the stories you tell through it just naturally do that. But Wander Home also has that same problem sometimes in sessions where it can kind of lull. And so I was inspired by the feeling of Wander Home, but wanted to kind of address that kind of belonging outside belonging issue sometimes where they can kind of hit that lull. And the solution to that in my brain leads me to Ironsworn, because Ironsworn is also GMless, but I don't think anyone, at least if you're playing it using all the mechanics, it's hard to hit that kind of lull in Ironsworn, because Ironsworn does give you a million levers to pull to progress things. And it always has that progress mechanic to kind of keep you on track. This is what I'm working on. I'm progressing on something, or I'm rolling on something to generate what I'm doing next. And so I wanted to kind of blend the momentum of Ironsworn with the freeform nature of a belonging outside belonging game. And then the last piece and where the OSR kind of comes into it is I am a sucker for hex crawls. Like that is my favorite thing. Again, I hate prep. I don't want to run a a dungeon that I have to read, maybe if it's fast enough, sure. But like anything beyond that, I don't want to do it. What I want to do is go sit down at a table, slap down a map with a bunch of hexes on it, and go, let's go. Cool. Oh, cool. This is here. How are we dealing with that? Like, and even better, a collaborative hex crawl takes it to the next level for me. How can we all work together to tell what's
Yeah.
happening as we kind of travel? So when I was building out what this wanted to be, I took from Wander Home the idea of focusing on the journey and the travel, because to me that's what's important in Pokemon. It's not the places you hit, it's how you get there.
Yeah.
That's kind of the big part of it. But I wanted it to have the progression of like an Ironsworn, where you know how you're progressing, you have things to push you forward and things that keep track of. And I also wanted that kind of OSR hex crawl feel of that, like very simple to understand system and the ability to like just go. Like if you want to just go and you all decide what comes up next or roll for what comes up next, you can do that without having to do any sort of prep or anything like that in the moment. And so all of those things kind of came together to become what Pokemon Tales kind of is this blend of all those things, where it's technically probably closest to a no dice, no masters game, but like I don't even feel comfortable calling it that fully, because it does have so many like progress and a combat mechanic and like all these things that feel a little Ironsworn, feel a little like kind of OSR, at least to me. Though I think people reading it would be like, "What do you mean?" But like the roots are there. It was literally that type of game at one point. So
I think you definitely see the OSR more in practice than you do maybe just like reading through the book. The more
mhm.
that you sit with the game, I feel like it becomes more apparent that there are the roots there.
Yeah.
I also think that you definitely pulled like just the right amount of like Ironsworn into it, because as I said when we did our playtest, I've never done like no dice no master stuff before, and it was really easy to sort of pick up everything in Pokemon Tales and just sort of go with it, and the pacing really sort of created itself even as we were all sitting there just discussing and working on what came next. It really called back to a lot of the improv games I used to play when I was younger, and even stuff like Fiasco, which I'm a big fan of, where,
Love Fiasco.
yeah.
Love it. My favorite, like my first and favorite like GMless game. So
Oh
yeah.
man, yeah, it's absolutely great. I'm always a sucker for games where it's like, okay, like you said, collaborative stuff, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
collaborative world building, character building, storytelling, and this goes the next step and really combines all of those in a I would argue almost perfect marriage of each piece, which is so cool. And our playtest really blew my mind when like you said, so many other Pokemon TTRPGs do such a good job of making the video game and making it feel like the video game. But when we played, it was this whole like we did the whole thing with the child born with the mark of Giratina, and unleashing Giratina on the world is something you would never really expect to see as the something possible within a Pokemon game, which I thought was so cool. And the possibilities really are kind of endless because of the way that the game system is defined, which I think is so cool.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. That definitely was an intended piece. Like across the way, there's been things that's come up where it's like, can I do this in your system? And if the answer is no, I'm like, well, that's a problem. Like I had a friend who was like, well, can I play a talking Pokemon that's sentient like Meowth and just like, does his own thing? And originally in the OSR version, I was like, no, you can't. That's a problem. Like I
Yeah.
need to fix that. You should be able to. Like I want like in our playtest, like that concept came like when he introduced it, he was very much like, you may hate this. And I'm like, I don't know. And then he said, I'm like, no, I love that. Like, let's do it. Like, you should be able to do anything. I want a system where you can just throw it, where you can say, what if this is a regional variant that has completely different typing?
Yeah.
And I don't go, there goes all my prep out the window. Let me write a new Pokemon. Or I want to use this Fakeamon. I have the established written adventure I have uses Fakeamon because it's like, why not? Like, it shouldn't be that hard to interpret them. There's so many as a resource online if you have a game that can handle that.
Yeah, which is another thing. Like, I know I've already said this, but I talk about this game so much to everyone who will listen because I really do love it. And that's one of the coolest parts about it too is it's so perfectly designed to be able to just be like, what do you want to do? Okay, let's do that. I've mentioned this on Twitter before, and I think I've said it to you. My daughter is like super excited to sit down and try this, and she's like, I want to be a talking Ralts. Can I do that? And I'm like, well, just looking at the way the game is designed, yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't. Absolutely, why not? And I think that's another really great piece of the sort of charm of this game is just that openness. Do whatever you want, it will work.
Yeah, that is it's very reminiscent of like my GM style where I say yes to my detriment. And it's why I have to avoid playing systems that break easily. Like
Mm-hmm.
like fifth edition is D&D fifth edition, most popular system on the planet, is good at a lot of things, but it breaks too much if you say yes to a lot of things. And so I've gotten to the point in my like campaigns when I run it where I have to escalate like so much on the back end, like my threats to throw up my party because I've just
Mm-hmm.
said yes to my party so much that they can do whatever. But like I know that's what's going to happen because I want to in a game be able to just say, yeah, that's a cool idea. That's also why I love the like to token mechanic versus like a lot of other options because my least favorite thing in a game ever is when someone suggests an idea and we all go, oh, that's great. Oh, we'd love it. That'd be so cool if that's happened. And then we all stare at the dice and hope to God the dice let us do this cool thing we all just agreed would be amazing for the story. And then, God forbid, the dice say no. We all go, oh, that sucks. Well, I guess it doesn't happen. It's like, no, we all thought it would be cool. It happens. Move on. Like, just let it, like, let the chance is good. Randomness is good. Things shouldn't be predetermined. And I tried to put that in Pokemon Tales in the combat system still, like, give you that still risk and reward. You don't know how it's going to end up, but chance shouldn't ruin your story. Like, and you should be willing to, like, say, if this is for the betterment of the story, let it happen. Let's whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that I talk to a lot of people about, especially with fifth edition, where there's the argument that there's like no wrong way to play, which is true. As long as you're having fun and not being a jerk, great. But for me personally, I try and also do that thing where I'm like, okay, every time that I can say yes, I will say yes. But I also have to, in my head, be like, okay, I have a lot of calculations to do now to be like, okay, if I say yes here, then what does that mean I have to do now? And
Mm-hmm.
what I've found is with especially with the stuff where it's like someone wants to do something crazy and it's super cool and everyone's like, yeah, let's do it. And I'm like, hell yeah. I try to use inspiration as sort of a way to make that happen where it's like, okay, you have inspiration? Great, whatever, don't worry about rolling. I take your inspiration, this is the thing that happens. Because most of the time, those really cool moments will not break your games. And I think that's really important to remember is even if it's like something crazy against the boss or something that will bring them through like circumventing a major there's so many ways to go about interjecting or enhancing those situations and making your players feel cool and rewarding them for those brilliant moments is so important.
Yeah, I don't remember the million times that we barely scraped through on a dice roll against a boss by playing by the rules, but I do remember the time that my GM let a friend slam dunk a lich into a pit while we played the Space Jam music in the background because that was cool.
Hell
That
yeah.
sticks with me years later. It's not the like, oh, I just managed to roll a 19, his AC was 18. It's the ridiculous nonsense that he was like, sure, why not? And that's what sticks in your brain. I love that inspiration idea. I have a similar approach where it's like you can fail a check, like or sorry, you roll, you pass the check. but you think it'd be more narratively interesting, or your character would fail, or your character would more likely fail the check, even though the dice helped you, you can say, actually, I fail that, and I'm going to pocket that success for later.
Oh, I like that a
Because
lot.
it's like you should be able to. I hate succeeding when it's like, no, I shouldn't have passed that. My guy doesn't care at all. I have a freaking blood hunter that's like an expert in religion because he's good at intelligence. I'm like, he doesn't care. He doesn't know the religions of the like forgotten realms. He shouldn't pass that check. Let me fail that, pocket it for later, and save it whenever I like tank a survival check, which is like his defining thing that he should pass.
I love that. I think that's such a cool idea. I might have to steal that for future game.
Yeah, feel free.
So we talked a little bit about it, but developing a system is always such a like huge undertaking.
Mhm.
And you touched on it a bit, but from start to finish, was there anything about the process that was particularly like frustrating or difficult?
Yeah. So the system existed in my brain with minor tweaks, only minor tweaks being needed, like 3 months ago. And for me in particular, and I'm sure it's true for other people, but for like especially in the way my brain works, figuring it out is interesting. Writing it in a way that other people can understand is the just longest slog.
Hmm.
So for me, I didn't expect how long it would take, because there were long periods of time where I just couldn't like sit down and put pen to paper because I wasn't figuring anything out in the moment. I had already done that. The system existed in my brain. I could run it as it was. It was basically finished. Like there were tweaks here and there, but it already existed up here. And as you've seen, because you've played my game, like the playbooks are kind of, or the sheets are kind of designed to tell you enough of the rules to kind of get the hang of it. So between that and what I've had, the book was purely a so other people can play it necessity. It wasn't a solve. And that was really hard to actually like work through, especially over a long period of time, because this is like, I thought this was going to be a 15-page game. It's 48 pages. Like the scale, when I actually started writing it down and having to explain something that is very intuitive once you've played it once, even like in the first few minutes, but is very hard to sometimes explain on paper because it is kind of different than like traditional approaches to things.
Yeah, especially because a lot of the places where you've pulled stuff from are sort of I'm almost reluctant to use the term niche markets, but they
Mhm.
have very specific people that they cater to. So it's a lot of simple concepts, but it's a lot of simple concepts that are simple in practice, but present as kind of off the wall if you're more comfortable with like the more well known TTRPGs.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's definitely a change in mindset. That was actually the funniest thing running this at conventions and stuff like that, was that I have played a lot of belonging outside belonging games, and I interact with people who are in that space a lot. So like that language is a default like way we talk. When I ran this at conventions, I pulled Pokemon people primarily, like
Right.
people who were interested because they saw Pokemon in the title. They didn't care about the rest of the stuff as much. And so I, when I pulled this for random people, I have run it for significantly more people who have never touched a No Dice, No Masters game than who have. And so a lot of my reference points, I actually ended up being kind of a gateway to that style of game rather than capitalizing on existing knowledge. So that also kind of changed the way I wrote, thought about, explained it, all of that, because like one of my most default assumptions, this is how this works, wasn't actually a natural thing for most people. And so I had to like dial back and be like, I'm kind of teaching this system too in my own way of doing it.
Yeah, it definitely was an introduction to me, like I said earlier, and
Mhm.
will not be the last one of these games that I play because what an absolutely brilliant concept.
Yeah, it's that's been a common, actually a common trend, especially the first time I ran it when it was way off of being finished. Everyone at my table left with like my Twitter handle, but they all left with individualized recommendations of what belonging outside belonging game to go play. Because I'm like, all right, this isn't gonna be around for a while. You love this, that's awesome. Here, go play Sleepaway, go play Wanderhome, go play Venture. Like sending people out to go play different ones.
See, and that answers the next thing I was going to ask you because I was going to ask you if you had to pick like three, what would the three games that you suggest that people go check out would be?
Oh, for like belonging outside belonging style.
Yeah.
So actually, Sleepaway is definitely up there. Sleepaway is very a very niche like experience, but especially if you ever did like summer camp, that game will hit you in the chest with just like how much it rips out your heart for like that beautiful feeling of evoking that feeling.
I
It's
love
a
those.
great horror experience. Like it really just I've told so many beautiful stories with that game. And also like frankly, the playbooks are written so well. I joke that the lifeguard is a call out post for me. Like I read the book and was like, how dare you? And I'm like, to a book, because it was just like it felt like it was like just calling me out. Wanderhome's incredible. It's probably one of the more popular like blowing outside blowing games out there. It's kickstarted very well. It's I think what catapulted Possum Creek Games and Jay into like kind of the forefront of the style.
Right.
Um, Along that lines, Yazaba's Bed and Breakfast is just finished funding. Is coming out soon. It's also a Jay Dragon and Possum Creek Games game. That one's more Possum Creek, though Jay's obviously had a hand in it. But that one's incredibly experimental and interesting. I think that will do huge things for game design because it kind of like Pokemon Tales takes a lot of those blowing outside blowing ideas, but uses them in unique and different ways. And then honestly, I'm gonna slide in a fourth,
Please.
but Biscuit Fun Games, which you actually played with Alyssa in your playtest, they just released Tournament Arc, which is a
Yes.
sports anime blowing outside blowing game. And again, that one I think really iterates on the formula in interesting ways. They use actual episodes for their scenes, and the episode moves are all themed to what that like episode should do. And then they add legacy content where your playbooks can gain new moves and like the stories you shift to can happen depending on the episode you play. And it's at its base as the rules already exist incredible, but I've also gotten to play some of the other stuff they're playing to add on to it later. And it's insane. The rules Alyssa wrote for like a Yu-Gi-Oh style game. Kind of like how Pokemon Tales has like the combat system is its own little token based kind of battle system outside of that's not something that exists in like other blowing style blowing games. What Alyssa's doing with the and what Biscuit Fun Games as a whole is doing with the especially the Yu-Gi-Oh one because that's the one I've gotten to see or the card battle one is like just super interesting and like experimental and really impressive.
Oh, that's super exciting. Yeah, I've had some time to like look it over. It looks so cool. Oh man.
Yeah.
And one thing that these games do really well, I feel like from just the few that I've looked over since we've played, and also just Pokemon Tales itself, is I'm anyone who knows me will tell you I'm a huge sucker for organic growth, character development, and more than anything else, the way that player characters bond with each other over time. That's always my favorite thing, and this game has so much room for that,
Mm-hmm.
and can become even with like compelling storytelling and the incredibly rich flavor. There's just so much room to be able to just find your places together with each other in the world, who you are, and this is just this the system and the concept itself is probably the best implementation I've seen of allowing for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like so the original was Dream Askew, Dream Apart. It was a two-part book. Um, I would say like they really did fantastic stuff with it originally, and everyone's just expanded on it since. But like, I can't I can't say it played a belonging outside belonging game that doesn't have these really good like character connections, relationships. A lot of them use lures, which is an interesting thing where when you like acknowledge someone else's role and treat them as their role, then you get a token for like supporting like kind of the recognizing their character and having their character play their character the way it should be. Like you get a reward for kind of like bringing them in, and I think that's a really neat way to like I'm not doing all the work to make my character be who my character's supposed to be. You're also incentivized to like feature me and support me in role play, so it becomes more like collective and collaborative.
Yeah, which is awesome because again, one of the most important things in the space is being able to support each other, and that's true in game, out of game, just throughout the community, and every facet really is. We will always do better when we uplift, whether it's player to player or
Mm-hmm.
character to character, a whole party, or in any way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what would you say is the most important thing or series of things for that you think people should know before starting the process of like creating a system or a game?
Finish things. That's that. The two things I can say is one, find whatever mindset, reality, whatever you have to do to get yourself able to dump things on paper. Don't hold it up here. Like just dump it out. You can edit later and you can tighten it up later, but get it out first and get good at finishing things. That's I can't take credit for that advice. That came, I believe that was Jay as well. But like get good at finishing things. Everyone can start things. Get good at finishing things. And sometimes when you can't finish something, take a break and finish something else. I could not have finished Pokemon Tales without my two other games so far, Crawl and Go Channel, because I took a break to go knock those out, one in a week, one in a day, and then I came back months later and finished it off like in another day. But the energy from finishing something gives you so much fulfillment and motivation versus like, especially if you're on a longer project and you're just grinding away, like knock out something small, like just go do something so you have something out so you can say you've done it. And so you've done all of that logistical part of the process. Don't have your first thing be this monstrosity that's like this long project, because you'll just get kind of stuck in the weeds. Versus just getting stuff out there, like whatever it may be. Like there are so many. Itch allows you to upload whatever. People do one-page games. Like it's fine. All of my games are edited in Microsoft Word. Like it is. Don't stress. Just get something out there. And like people have downloaded them and played them and enjoyed them. I mean, like even Pokemon Tales, which obviously is probably like is my most ambitious and like probably my best one. But like I've had people tell me like they've run Crawl and like on their own, like people I don't know, like, hey, I ran Crawl, I loved it, it was super great to teach my players. Like I've so having that thing out there that you can say I've done this, I've completed something is huge. And also just not being so worried about getting things perfect as you put them on page that it slows you down. Like just dump. Like so much of Pokemon Tales came out me just like typing away at 11 o'clock at night, like, you know, 2 Red Bulls in, just dumping words on the page, and then going back the next day and being like, all right, tighten this up, change this, actually need to do this wording here. I'm still doing last minute editing now where I'm going back through and like tweaking these little things where it's like, oh, I capitalized this 7 times and decided not to the 8th. Great. Like all those little things, but you can do that later. But for now, like you just need to get things on paper and then try and finish things, even if you're not comfortable with like nothing's going to be perfect. It's fine. Throw it out there. There's no reason you can't come back and go, here's the second edition later and tweak up those things that you didn't love about the first after you had it out for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that deep in my heart because that's something that I've had so much trouble with over the years. Just as I've created a lot of homebrew settings and nothing, in my opinion, worth publishing, but very small conceptual games for like small groups of friends and whatnot is that exact issue of I'll either be like, okay, I have it all ready to go. I just have to put it on paper. And then you get stuck somewhere and then it just sits and it just doesn't work. Or when I'm designing a world, I get so nitpicky, right? And you get to a point where like, this has to be perfect before I can move on. And all that does is slow you down, hurt you in the process, risks having you either forget or change or just stagnate. And it's not worth it. It's never worth it.
Yeah. And
And
not
so,
to be a cynic, but like the first thing you put out could be the greatest thing on the world. And if it's the first thing you put out, it's going to take a long time for people to find it. So like making your first thing perfect is just an exercise in futility, because
mhm.
then you're even more mad because you're like, why is it no one seeing how great this is? When it's like you throw out something that's kind of crap. It's
Yep.
okay. Like it's fine. You'll make other things. And like I skew towards perfectionism in a lot of things. It took me a lot to like really retain that advice. But once I did, it's just been so much better for me to just like, yeah, just get it out there. It's fine. Um, and like another one is like do game jams. People do game jams on Itch. Those are inherently time restricted. So you feel even less self-conscious about just dumping something because you're like, no, I only did this in like a week because I had to because of the game jam. So you're like, one, you have a kind of group of people you might be building off of, but two, you kind of even pull even less of those expectations off yourself because you know that it's time restricted, and you kind of force yourself to put it out because like the game jam's ending, you got to get it out there. that's actually where the Pokemon Dungeon Crawler like expansion I did way back when, which is called Bill's PC. That's where that came from. Was just I did it for Bat City Game Jam, and I was like, you know what? I'm using all these rules to run my own game. I might as well dump them in a document, throw some formatting on them, and put them in the game jam and see if anyone uses it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's also just great advice. Okay, so with that, closing thoughts. Anything else that you'd like to bring up or go over at all?
Um, the only thing I would say is whether you like Pokemon or not, I would say give the system a read through. It does. I feel like it does interesting things in that kind of space, and I hope people play it and love it for Pokemon. I also hope people maybe read and there's take whatever you like from it. Like I hope there's some things from it that maybe make some have some legs outside of just that kind of Pokemon space. Um, and give it a shot. Like it's incredibly easy to set up. It's you can have your party running in 30 minutes. Like it's very simple. Um, and yeah, I think that's really it. I really hope people like it. It's been a labor of love for me. If if it dropped tomorrow, frankly, and everyone was like, "This sucks," I'd be like, "Well, I'm still gonna play my Pokemon Tales games because I have a great time when I run it." But I think I really hope people like it, and frankly, because I do this with every game I pick up, I hope people take it apart and use the pieces in all sorts of different ways and break it, bend it, whatever they need to do to make it work the way they want to.
Yeah, that's one of the best parts about TTRPGs is just the way things grow off each other, right?
Yeah.
And just for the record, if it comes out and everyone's like, "This is terrible," they're objectively wrong. This game is fantastic. I don't do this for everything. I won't do this for every guest, but I can honestly I will never stop singing the praises of this game. I love this game so much.
I appreciate that. That has also, I think, been the last note I guess I'll add on it is just like the how mind blowing it's been, how much people have responded to it, and that would kind of go back to the just put your stuff out there because you never know. Like part of the reason why this got finished is because I have had so many people who are like, "This is really good," and I'm like, I almost feel obligated to those people to get them something they can play with because like people loved it enough that I was like, oh, okay, this isn't just going to be like my little niche thing I used to run a game. Like these people want it. I need to finish it for their sake, if nothing else, because people actually like it and enjoy it. And like if you find people like that, like encourage that by like bringing them into the process. Like I worked really hard to let everyone who was like, hey, that sounds kind of cool. I'm like, do you want to play test? Like, do you want to see it? Because especially when you're just starting, anyone who expresses any sort of interest, you want to like really like surround yourself with that because it motivates you. Like surround yourself with people who are willing to support you, uplift you, and like the stuff you do because it's going to, when times are tough, you can fall back on that. Like I have a friend I've worked through this whole process, Moss, who's been like one of the biggest advocates for this game, and sometimes I think he pushes it more than I do, and I appreciate that so much because on days where I don't have the energy for it, seeing that always kind of gives me more like energy to jump back into it.
Awesome. And I think, well, that's going to do it for this episode of Roll for Perspective. This has been great. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. This was awesome, and I hope we can sit down again soon. You can find out more
Absolutely.
about. Oh yeah, you can find out more about Pokemon Tales over on Marshall's Twitter, which will be linked down below. And shameless plug: don't forget to catch Dice Tray's action over on Twitch Tuesday nights, 8:30 p.m. EST, with the complete episode up right here on YouTube the following Thursday. Thanks for watching.